good morning. I'm super excited to be here and also mildly confused as to why the Estonians invited me here to talk to them about how to digitize public services. I'm half expecting someone to drag me off the stage at any point and say this is a presentation for Berlin, Paris, London, and any other capital in the world, but not in Tallinn. But I think it's actually representative of what the minister was just saying, that you can't rest on your laurels in this world. If you want to think in billions, you have to keep looking at the next billion, and at some point the billions will become trillions. And it's just so exciting that Estonia is not just sitting here and saying, we're great, it's saying, how can we be better? And I just want that sort of attitude and that energy to continue, even if I get a bit boring. Remember, there's energy and attitude, and if something's boring, push harder. I'm not being dragged off, so this is real. I even put a second slide up to talk about why I think I'm here, because I was so self-conscious about talking about Estonia, in Estonia. I'm here because for the last 8 years, well, I think I'm here, I've been obsessed about getting technology into the public sector. I didn't wake up one day and say, public services aren't good enough. I actually had a bit more of a personal introduction to how difficult it is to get technology into the public sector. My wife was a trauma surgeon. She was operating on people, saving lives, and then one day at breakfast she said, I want to start a tech company. I said, okay, and then 2 months later, this was before the investor winter that we're going through right now, she'd raised some money, she'd hired an American CTO, she'd built product, she was selling to customers, it was all great, and I said, this is amazing, the market for health tech in the UK is huge. And she said, no, that's the public sector technology market, and we don't sell to them. And I said, what do you mean? You have great software. You have a great product. The private sector are loving buying from you. And she said, trust me, I worked in the system. They will not buy from a small software business, even if our technology is good, better, and more effective than anything else that they're buying. Now, I could have left the conversation there. It's probably a wise thing to do generally in relationships, to not combat. But I said, no, I disagree with you. I can do this. So she said, fine, quit your job, come and work for me, and see how you get along. So for the next 18 months, this was 2013, 2014, I worked for her for free. I sold 0 contracts to the public sector, and that should have been or could have been the end of my journey. But it wasn't, not because I convinced myself I was an incredible salesperson and the system was broken, but because of the 35 to 40 companies that I met in waiting rooms, waiting to talk to CIOs of health departments across England, desperate to sell their better software, their better technology, their better and innovative ways of thinking about solving systemic issues to the public sector, and failing. And something bugged me deeply. I could have given up. I didn't. I started a business, and for the last 8 years, we've had this mission of, there is this notion of a better governed world. We have to think about how we can make our world work better. And it starts with improving public services. And technology is the only way to improve public services. And that's, I think, why I ended up here. So, this hasn't always been the case. Quick history lesson. Public-private sector collaboration has existed for a very long time and has actually resulted in some of the most incredible innovation that we all use. If you look at my weird blue cloud over there, it's basically everything a Gen Z person needs in their life. The internet, digital camera, GPS, and a microwave. That has all come out of the public sector. Public sector innovation, absorbed by private sector, developed, improved, and turned into phenomenal product. But in the last 20 years, this symbiosis, this mixing of public and private innovation and investment has somewhat dried up. And I think we've forgotten how to work together. So where's the love? At this moment in time, the private sector is investing more and more and more into innovation. And all of you see it in your private lives. The amount of technology that we are all benefiting from privately is spectacular, transformational, world-changing. And yet, how much of that is being absorbed by the public sector? Where is the symbiosis? Where are the connections? They're diminished. At a point when digitizing public services is the most critical mission for governments today. This is my point. Right now, for me, the most important thing to be working on is digitizing public services. It is the most critical mission for governments today. If you think about the stresses, the strains, the impacts that external factors are having on all of our societies, if we want to maintain the amazing places where we live, work, and raise families, we need to make sure that citizens are feeling love, that governments are effective and that we are adapting in a resilient and continuous way to the pressures that we're facing. This is my carrot stick slide. It's too many words on a slide. It goes against all business school sort of plans of how to talk. But, and the list would be a lot longer if the screen was bigger. But there are a lot of pressures facing government right now. A lot. Post-pandemic, the strains on non-digital public services are immense. Waiting lists, hospital queues, people not being able to get jobs. It's crazy. What it does is twofold. Non-digital services are becoming digital, and digital services are having to get better. We are lucky on the next 2 points that there are younger people in government and younger people using government services, and both elements push the system to develop better software. If you're in government, you've used an iPhone probably now, or an Android device, and you just demand better. If you're a citizen, you are used to phenomenal products in your private life. You don't want to write on paper when you're coming to fill out a form for your government. Then there's the obvious cost constraints and looming budget deficits. From a UK context, our health system talks about the promise of technology without using it. But if you think about how we're going to solve our budget deficits in the UK, I hear preventative care, artificial intelligence, pre-screening, virtual wards, digital consultations. It's all digital. It's not there. There's a big gap between the hyperbole and the reality. So we have to mush this together. And I haven't even mentioned artificial intelligence. I haven't mentioned the war in Ukraine and the acceleration of the dependence on digital defense and cyber capabilities. You start to see how much opportunity or problems or stresses governments and public services will face if they don't embrace the challenges that are coming. So what have I actually learned in 8 years? When we started public, we had this mission, a better governed world. The only way we're going to make a better governed world is by introducing more and more technology into the public sector, qualifying the supply and increasing the demand from government for innovation, and helping both partners and parties talk. And I think, again, because I like color and because we're in a dark room, I've put 4 bubbles up here. On the one side, startups. But startups is the wrong way sometimes of thinking about this. In that bubble, think entrepreneurs, innovation, large technology companies. You heard the minister talk about Google. I would put Google in technology, startups, better thinking, innovation. On the other side, you have government. Loosely, anyone who touches government, anyone who can order a commercial contract, etc. And then you have 2 facilitating bubbles. The attitudes of startups towards government, the attitude of government towards startups, and the ecosystems where we all meet, greet, and interact. So I'm just going to do a quick show of hands because I've talked for 6 minutes and people tend to sort of switch off. Who in this audience, put your hand up if you work in the startup industry or technology industry. Okay, good, you're better than most audiences at 10 o'clock. Keep up, 1 second. And who here works in government or loosely in government? Okay, so, and then we probably got some investors and probably got some people that came to the wrong event. But apart from that, hands up if you are in startups and currently have a commercial contract with government. Okay, 1, 2, a few, it's good, otherwise I'd have to go home at this point. And hands up if you work in government, are in control of a commercial relationship with a startup. Okay, so we've got quite a few. It's not bad, actually. We've got the first startings of interactions happening. But this could be more, right? I saw a lot of hands, I saw less hands. How do we get more and more people into this circle of this positive flywheel? I have messages, I'll go back for 1 second. I have messages for each group. And it's not exclusive, it's not extensive. I don't have time, I'll be kicked off very quickly. But I just want to deliver a few key messages for those who work in technology, those who work in government, all of us, how we can help our attitudes to things and why ecosystems are important. For startups, you probably know this, but government is not another SaaS client. It doesn't even like to buy in a SaaS way. It has CapEx, not OpEx. They're not a VC and they're not the private sector. They typically don't want to hear about your roadmap when you run out of money or what the next product is that you're going to build that's going to change your company for the better. Because all they hear is red flag, red flag, red flag. You're running out of money, you haven't built the thing, what are we talking about, why are you here? It's just not the way to sell to government. And it's fundamentally a step change that a startup founder needs to make when talking to government. Talk about the great product that you're bored about, because that's really interesting for government. Talk about how effective and innovative it is, and how much better it is than anything they're using. Talk about how it fixes one of their key policies that they're looking to implement so that they can stay in power. Learn your customer. It's a different beast. It's a great partner, but learn about them. Deeply learn about them, and you will see enormous traction. I'm looking at time. I've got one little anecdote, Biobot Analytics. It's a company that I think is one of the most underutilized businesses, technology companies in the world. They developed a software that sits in sewers, and it tracks what's in the sewage, right? So think about zero infrastructure, additional cost for government, zero friction, just a little machine that sits in the sewage, and it tracks what's in the sewage. They used to use it to look for drug epidemics in the US. Can we see how much fentanyl is going through our system in a zip code, in a different zip code? Then COVID came, and they discovered they could measure COVID shedding in sewage, right? This is not individual testing, and it's not as powerful as the systems that were put in place, but as a proxy to see where COVID was starting, where COVID was ending, where there were trends emerging. It was the simplest, most powerful system that I've ever seen to track on a frictionless, continuous basis for minimal cost, the spread and then diminishing impact of COVID. Underutilized. No one's heard of it here, I'm pretty sure. It should be in every sewer, in every country around the world. Or there should be 6 companies like it, pushing. But because that interaction between the private and public sector is slow and broken, they weren't able to talk, they weren't able to get the pilot, there were restrictions, there were barriers. Are you going to run out of money? They're not. I'm not saying everyone needs to buy Biobot. I have no affiliation with the company. I'm just using it as an example to say that if you're in government, tap startups for innovation. Even if you don't buy from them, what's the hurt with speaking to them? Think about how you could use your sewers differently. It's flowing, water's there, information is under there, you're not using it, no infrastructure change, no cost, think. Startups are a perfect complement to government, and they need to be respected this way. In this light, it's a real bugbear of mine. Governments have to re-educate their workforce and embrace modern technology. I put it on a screen in nice words in case people take photos, but in case you're listening, this is fundamental. It is fundamental. You cannot be in government in senior positions and not understand technology. You need to understand what cloud computing is, what an API is, I think, it's useful, what interoperability means, what digital standards can bring about, what a common way of working is. You need to understand a little bit about the impact of artificial intelligence. It is unacceptable to make jokes about technology in the way that I've heard over the last 8 years. I've lost count of the number of senior government officials I've spoken to who make a joke that they don't know how to access their emails or that they don't know how to unlock their smartphone. That's like a CFO of a public sector, of a publicly listed company saying, oh, P&Ls, balance sheets, I don't really know about any of that stuff, but it's fine, right? It's not fine. It is fundamentally wrong, and it's not changing fast enough. If you are in government and you want a senior position, you need to be digitally native, or at least digitally savvy, because you have P&L responsibility, and you should stop spending money in things that don't work, and you should start looking at spending that money in things that do work. So it's a real line in the ground for me. If you want to be in government, you have to be digitally savvy. Example, I'm again conscious of time. In the UK, our Ministry of Defence procures continuous innovation programs for its leading civil servants. It pushes them to have innovation as an instinct, that's what they call it. They want them to be digitally native. They want them to understand the innovation that is outside of their immediate purvey, that they can't see, so that they can begin easing procurement systems, trialing things, testing things, etc. And that brings me to attitudes. And I've got Estonia and Ukraine as 2 countries here which I think have the right attitude, and you heard it in the opening remarks from the minister. You've got to reach out. There's got to be a willingness to collaborate. There's got to be a willingness to listen. The biggest risk we all face in public service delivery is inertia. Not doing anything is not going to work. So how do we do things in a way that works? In the purple box, I think, is the most fundamental message I want to leave. You talk about failure the whole time. Like, I don't want to fail. I have a risk of failure. What if something goes wrong? It's not failing. You've got to reimagine it as learning, and learning fast. And the faster you learn, the less mistakes you'll make. It's just simple. And the human mind has a really interesting way of playing with us. And the human mind within government often gets even more cemented around this, which is, if you only see the obstacles, you're going to only see obstacles and you're going to hit them. If you see the path, which is why I'm obsessed about this mission, if you see that you want to build a better governed world, you will find the path to a better governed world. The software that you want is out there. The people you want to work with are out there. The colleagues that you want to educate are ready to be educated. But you have to see the path and miss the obstacles. You have to translate from failing to learning. Look at Ukraine. They've digitized their entire public services, more or less, they will have very, very soon, during a war. Estonia, more startups per capita than Silicon Valley. When you have the right mentality, it trickles down, it changes things. And it changes things particularly when you have strong ecosystems. Strong ecosystems like we have today, where you have investors, people who've come to the wrong conference, startups, public sector officials, all coming together to talk. Talking. And you build resilience. You build a network of people to bounce ideas off one another. You say, hey, did you see how I sold that piece of kit to the Ministry of Justice? That could really be helpful for you when you think about how to sell to a Ministry for Transportation. Or what I really found useful was being on this framework, or going to that talk, or reimagining the way I present my software in this way. That's what an ecosystem does. It also brings government and startups together in ways that actually just feed and foster better conversation, like we're hopefully going to have today. So we really need to support ecosystem builders. I'm not saying everyone needs to reach in their pocket and support Latitude 59, but for instance, this conference is forcing us all together in a very, very positive way. And let it not be the last time that each of you meet someone you didn't meet before today. Continue this conversation until next year and check in with each other. How are you doing? How have your objectives been reached or not? How many companies have you met with that blew your mind? How many have you actually procured from? Why haven't you procured from them? The evidence is there. If you look at the percentage of government contracts that are awarded to SMEs in countries which we as public think have strong ecosystems, they're winning. They're beating the large rubbish incumbents in some senses. They are actually making the difference, and they are breeding a whole new group of companies from the people that have worked within them. And they are starting to change the conversation. They're starting to make the impact that we all see as possible when you bring true innovation to public services. So, go back. I remind you all, just making sure there's a little time for questions. Digitizing public services, the most critical mission for governments today. If we are not focused on this, we will not be enjoying everything that we've enjoyed in the last 20 years or 30 years in the next 20 or 30 years. And I leave you with a quote from Mark Andreessen: always better to put someone on stage who's smarter and more famous than you are. In response to the COVID pandemic, he said, it's time to build. And he said it in 4 words, but I think those 4 words convey a lot of impetus. It's time to build good companies, it's time to build good relationships, it's time to build better attitudes, it's time to build ecosystems, it's time to build the public services of the future that we know we all need and desperately, desperately want to see. So thank you for listening. I've got questions or not. I have questions that I can ask myself and keep talking if I don't have questions. But the last call, don't let my conversation, don't let my presentation be the last time you think about these things. You've got 2.5 hours today and 2 more days of conferencing around to meet people that you haven't met before and to just open up and explore what's possible. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation, and I also think, you kept beautifully in time. If we look at the timer here, we might have to give you a German honorary citizenship after this. We did actually get one question from Marta through Votemo, and the question is quite straightforward, and it also relates to your personal experience. What are the best use cases in selling to the UK government in particular?
Okay, well, I think that's a very broad question, but that's okay. If anyone has any more questions, I think it starts with what I went back to on the startup slide, which is figure out where your product makes sense. And if there is not a direct use case for your product, think about the services that you would need to wrap around to make it a good product. Again, I go back to understanding your customer. Government is not the same as the private sector. They have quirks and curiosities around them. So it may be that you have a killer app, but it's missing some bits. If you're missing those bits, learn what those bits are and either partner with someone who can do that, whether it's a wraparound change management piece or something like that, or something else. Then figure out how that potential partner wants to buy from you. Can you be procured outside of a framework? Unlikely. Do you need to be on the right framework? What is the minimum threshold with which you can be procured? And then when you go and find that person, go and find how you meet them. LinkedIn is actually a really good place to meet civil servants in the UK. I'm not sure about other countries. They're active, and the ones you want to talk to are looking out for companies to come and talk to. Sign up to events. Get yourself, as I said, on these frameworks. Get yourself to a lot of the meetings that take place to discuss solutions that you may never have heard of before. Governments put out a lot of these PINs, they're called in the UK, which are pre-information meetings, where you can go and talk and explain what you're doing and try and shape the way government is thinking about what it needs to buy. And then ultimately, like I said, when it comes to competing, take the time to understand in your response what your client is actively looking for. Be sympathetic to their own limitations, and then put in place, the answers and the system behind your product that allows you to sell better into government.